What I'm going to talk about today is this construction in Japanese and also some German equivalent. So this be eba construction. So this it's a verb, and then the verbal morphology, and then this particle ba. And this in early Middle Japanese, this function as a causal marker. So this is our first example. 苦しきことのみまされば、いといと思いわびたるを、because only harsh things increasingly happen. Koi was very much depressed. So this lady right here is Koi, and she was one of the many wives of the emperor, and she was very beautiful, and but she was from poor family, so she was bullied by other wives in the palace. Okay. And the translation of this text in present day Japanese doesn't use this eba form, but it uses node form. So 辛いことばかり増えていくので、行為が大層ひどく途方に暮れているのを。So we don't use this eba form to mark because. But we do use eba in present day Japanese, but it has another function. So it works as a conditional in present day Japanese. So here it is. So this is a present day Japanese example. 恨むのが最もな点も可愛らしくぼかして言えば、それにつけて男の愛情も増すことでしょう。Or even the things you definitely hate, if you just mention them sweetly, men will love you more. So here, to mark if clause, we use this eba construction. And this is a translation of this original text where it doesn't use eba, but it uses aba now. So, 恨むべからん不死をも憎からずかすめなさば、それにつけて哀れも勝りぬべし。Okay. And this eba has another function, which I'm going to call symmetric conjunction or logical conjunction in early modern Japanese, a little bit later in the history. So this is the example. なりものに怯えぬもあれば、怯える子もあろうし。Okay, so here's eba. Oops. And what it means is probably someone not scared by a loud noise, and some kids are scared. So here I'm going to call it a logical symmetric conjunction because this is it's like a logical conjunction. You switch around and you get the same truth condition for P and Q. It's equivalent to Q and P. And what's interesting is that German seems to have a similar path, the semantic shift. So in early New High German, also the morpheme I'm going to look at is this, and then these are dialectal variants of the same morpheme, and well, it's a cognate of when. And it had causal function in early New High German in type 1. This is a classification of this goggles that I'm adopting. So here's an example. Well, then unfortunately I'm not very good at pronouncing early New High German, so I'm going to just read it English. So because the Lord has seen the humility of his maid, so all generations call me blessed. So here then is working as because. And in modern or present day German, or it's just right after the type 2, after like 16th century, it got this conditional meaning, and well, it's same in the modern or present day German. I cry with you if you lost a friend of yours. All right, so the goal of this talk is the following. So as for Japanese eba, it started out as a causal, and they got acquired the symmetrical logical conjunction, and in present day Japanese, it's used as conditional. Similarly, German Van der Waal and Van, it has the similar shift from causal to conditional. So the research question is that how did this V-Eva construction and Van der Waal then morpheme, how this semantically shift from causal to conditional? All right, now I want to, but I'm gonna mainly focus on Japanese. So puzzles of the traditional grammar in what the Japanese traditional grammarians said. So this has been discussed widely, actively among the traditional grammarians as well. So for instance, in Sakakura, this verbal suffix a is called mizenke, and it's a marker of unsettled or irrealist form. And F form is izenke, which is a settled or realist form. And the basic assumption is that the particle ba is an ambiguously marked conditional. So in the classical or traditional grammar, classical Japanese, we have aba construction, which denotes kate joken, hypothetical conditional. And eba is so settled plus particle ba conditional, so it's a kakute joken, settled conditional. But in present day Japanese, this aba is no longer used. And instead, for some reason, the function of kate joken, hypothetical conditional, is now marked by this eba form. And how did the traditional grammarian try to explain this shift? So Kobayashi's explanation of this causal conditional shift is the following. So phi eba psi in classical Japanese, it denotes settled conditional. So it expresses conditional dependency between two settled propositions. So the two specific events are connected, and that somehow denotes causal interpretation. And this causal dependency between phi event and psi event is generalized over time. And then it acquired this hypothetical conditional meaning. So it's generalized, it's more hypothetical. And this morpheme, which used to denote settledness or realist, this is somehow lost. And in modern Japanese grammar, it's called kateke, hypothetical form. So it really lost its settledness feature or realist feature. And I always find this explanation unsatisfactory because it's not clear what motivates the generalization of the causal eba into the conditional. Especially we already have, or in early Middle Japanese, they already had this aba conditional, which seems like a genuine conditional, hypothetical. And also, why is this settledness feature of A is lost? It got completely opposite meaning function. Okay. Now, another puzzle is that it seems to be going against this generalization of language change. So according to Chaga and Dashit, meanings tend to become increasingly subjective and increasingly procedural. So it becomes more about the utterance than about the content. So to be concrete, let me quote their examples. So again, incidentally, it's about this because. So this causal statement is more like a basic content level causation. So John came back because he loved her. So John's loving of her caused John to come back. And in a later time, it got this epistemic use. So the knowledge that my knowledge that John came back, that knowledge made me think, maybe made me conclude that John loved her. And then even later, it goes up the higher level, more procedural, more about utterance level. So it can modify like speech act. So what are you doing tonight? Because there's a good movie on. So this is like the causal meaning is modifying the speech acts. I'm asking this question because there's a good movie on. So it seems like the diachronic development seems to go in this way, more subjective, more procedural. Now going back to the my Japanese causal to conditional shift. So causal statement is the speaker's judgment that there is a causal dependency between two specific facts, two specific events. So it's more subjective and procedural. On the other hand, conditional statement is a quantification over event predicates. So I would say it's less subjective and less procedural. So this shift from causal to conditional seems to be decreasingly subjective and decreasingly procedural. So this path from causal to conditional seems to going against this general trend of semantic change. And of course, this is just a trend, and I'm not saying that this is like a genuine principle of language change, but it seems it doesn't match. So that's the point. All right. So before going to present my own analysis, I would like to review Fukuda's analysis, which I adopt. In Fukuda, Fukuda treats EBA as a conjunction. So the particle ba in classical Japanese, according to Fukuda, it's actually ambiguous. So remember, in traditional grammarian assume that ba is just a conditional marker, but Fukuda says it's actually ambiguous. So ba is so after the a suffix, it is the ba one is a conditional. And ba is a conjunction. And the verbal morphemes a and e, according to Fukuda, they are not markers of realist or irrealist, but they are markers of syntactic positions. And Fukuda is not generative linguist, so I'm translating his idea into generative terms. So a is, I would say, is a marker of, is a head of aspect. And so it's a minus finite. And this aspect phrase denotes an event predicate or unsaturated proposition. On the other hand, a morpheme is a saturated proposition. It's a head of CP. And the difference, well, I already indicate here, A can embed a modal phrase, but this I cannot embed modal, so this is not possible. And this is tested in the corpus. So A can follow a model, but I cannot follow a model. So in the corpus of historical Japanese, there are a lot of me, rame, and keme, but there are zero occurrences of ma, rama, or kema. Okay, so this model of probability cannot be embedded under A. And me, rame, keme forms are tested. And I have an example of me here from early Middle Japanese. So mono haka na kimi ni wa 次に至るよその覚えはアラメと。Although there might be some rumors that it is too much for a humble person like me. Oops. Now, so according to Fukuda, so in early Middle Japanese, eba is a conjunction. It's not conditional, but conjunction. The conjunction of two saturated propositions. And aba is the conditional. It's a genuine conditional, and it is a quantification over event predicates. And here's some corpus data. So in Mayo period, which is like 8th century, it's eba is being used as causal and also conjunction. And very few conditional usage, but in mid-Edo, it's like 18th century, more conditional usage. All right. And the syntactic difference is kind of interestingly mirroring German data too. So going back to German, then. So for causal then, well, so first of all, I think most of you are familiar with German syntax, but let me just to clarify. So German is SOV language, but only in the subordinate clause. And in the matrix clause, the verb moves to the second position, so that's verb second. So when in causal then, the verb is indeed in the second position. So although it looks like a subordinate clause, it's treated like a matrix clause. So it's plus finite and it denotes saturated proposition. And in conditional usage of then in the modern German and some in a later period, the verbs comes at the end, so it's a verb last. So this then clause is a subordinate clause. And here's some corpus data. So then interpretation of then in type 1, like a 15th century, it's mostly used as causal. And well, but in type 2, it's almost well, there are actually not many instances of then in type 2, but in type 3, some conditional usage has emerged. And that's well, it has the same distribution with whether it was verb second or verb last. So in the type 1 where it was used as causal, it was mostly a verb second. And then when it started to be used as conditional, now the construction has verb last construction. And this one is the data for then, but this is very few. So it doesn't mean much, but it also has this causal and then verb second, and conditional usage seems to match with verb last. But again, it's so few, so I mean it's not very useful. Okay, now finally my analysis here. So I'm going to propose that the semantics of the V-EBA construction and then in German is a sequential conjunction in the sense of update semantics. So that is, so C updated by phi above psi, that what it does is first take the context C and then update the context with phi and take this part and then Opti with psi and take, oops, I thought I changed the color. Take this part. So indeed, the early Middle Japanese, so it's even earlier than the tale of Genji, the first example I show you in the 9th to 10th century. It has really the simple conjunction rule. So それを見れば、三寸ばかりなる人、糸美しゅうていたり。He looked at it, and then there was a person who was only 3 inches tall, sitting very lovely. So, this old man, he looked at this bamboo shoot, and then there was a little person who was only 3 inches tall, sitting very lovely. So this phi above psi is a sequential conjunction of events in chronological order. So he looked at it, and then he found this little person, phi and then psi. And also in German then there's similar temporal use. That first this happened and then this. So when St. Peter spoke to our master, Christ gave an answer to someone's question. So this, okay, another variant then. So this happened this and then this. And how do we get this? So if its semantics is conjunction, how do we get the causal meaning? So I would like to argue that the causal meaning is obtained by I implicature. So the very first example, kurushiki koto no mimasarebba. So the semantic interpretation of this sentence or this clause is the following. So all the harsh things increasingly happen, and she was very much depressed. And I implicates only harsh things happen, therefore she was very much depressed. So this comes from, well, not comes from, but well, we do this in English or in every language, I think. So it's a conjunction butt racing. So John turned the key and the engine started. Or when John turned the key, the engine started. For the I implication, John turned the key, therefore the engine started. Or when John turned the key, because John turned the key, the engine started. And for how do we get conditional meaning? We get that by changing this context to a suppositional context. So we get a sequential conjunction if this is a actual context. But if if this C is a suppositional context, then we get the conditional meaning, the present day Japanese style conditional interpretation if phi then psi, phi implies psi. So 裏物が最もな点も可愛らしくぼかして言えば、so hypothetically, let's assume that you mention things sweetly, then in those hypothetical contexts, men will love you more. And that's how we interpret conditional sentence. And so along the diachronic development, morphemes marked specifically for causal and symmetric conjunction have emerged. So in Japanese, so for causal, morphemes like kara and nore emerged in 19th century. And for conjunction, to it's been started to use in 17th century. And in German, there are causal markers like weil and dann or den. And also for temporal markers, there are aus. And also this then branched out from conditional then in 18th century. Yeah, so here's some examples of kara and node. So this is an example of kara. 丸薬を差し上げましょうから、それを朝晩に一服ずつ兼用なされますと、目先が開きまして、お食も進みましょう。Because I will give you some pills, you take one every morning and evening, the discomfort will go away and your appetite will come back. And then this example of ので、so 汝が泣くので、俺も打つ前とは思えども、because you cry, I also thought I better not attack you, but okay, so the causal construction, well, there are actually a lot of them. So in middle, when is this thing middle? Like 12th to 16th century. The causal meanings is almost always mostly marked by a verb form. But then later, there's kara and no, they have used in early model. So it's eba is rarely used for causal, but kara and no, they are more often used. And also to has emerged in like 17th century. So 動詞番を打ち切ると音楽一人放送もいけり。The monk finished playing Go and Hongak alone said Ozobo. I'm not sure what this means, but that this to has we see this to in this 17th century. Yes, for conjunction, so in mid-Edo era, mostly marked by eba form, but later to and other forms is used as conjunction, and not so much eba in modern Japanese. And for German, well, I think this is used in modern German as well. So I guess I don't really need to show examples, but for concreteness, this vowel, because I am not permitted to go against him. And then also then, because at the end I have begun by eating that rice. Yeah, so yeah, so in type 1, again, it's like well, I forgot when it was, like a 16th century, I guess. Out of van and van were used to mark causal meaning, but in type 2 already van was not used at all, and then some van, and then mostly dan, then, and vile we used to mark causal in type 3. All right. And my third proposal is the conditional meaning of eba obtains from Q implicature. So node and eba forms a scale, vile and van in German. And node is stronger than eba, well, vile is stronger than van because phi causes psi entails phi implies psi, but phi implies psi doesn't entail phi causes psi. So this is node and vile are stronger. Therefore, if the speaker decided to use the weaker form, like eba or van, phi eba psi or van phi psi, that Q implicates not cause phi psi. phi does not cause psi. And similarly, tau and eba and also and then forms a scale. And phi and psi entails phi implies psi, but not the other way around. So tau is stronger than eba and also stronger than then. So again, if the speaker decided to use the weaker form, phi eba psi or then phi psi, Q implicates it is not the case that phi and psi. And well, I think I showed this. Did I? I don't know. Anyway, so the conditional meaning in Mayo period. So okay. Eva was not used as conditional in Mayo period, but mostly Aba. But there are a lot of Eba in mid-Edo era. After other causal and conjunction markers have emerged. Okay, the conventional meaning of V-EBA is to mark a sequential conjunction. That's my proposal. But V-EBA could mean causal, conjunction, and conditional. So this early Middle Japanese hearer had to use contextual information to disambiguate the speaker's meaning for successful communication. And it seems like there are these stages. So for causal to conditional shift, first we start out with single morpheme, eba, which I'm going to call zero causal state, which is early Middle Japanese. And then someone started to use node to mark causal meaning. So this emergent causal stage. And then later we have categorical, well, in the present day Japanese, we have this categorical causal stage. So where we use node for causal and eba for conditional. And for conjunction to conditional shift, similarly, we have zero logical conjunction stage. We only have single marker, eba, that's used both for conditional and conjunction. And there's emergent logical conjunction stage where some people started to use to to mark conjunction and eba for other times. And then later we reach categorical logical conjunction stage where we use to for conjunction and eba for conditional. And what's interesting is that now we seems to be moving toward another stage. So to is generalized to, so to is started to originally marking this logical conjunction, but to is also used for conditional. So it's invading the usage of eba now. So this is the example here. So generalization of to. So in present day Japanese, we can say this. So nonbiri shiteru to okureru yo. So you take time and you'll be late. So that's a literal translation to use N for to. And well, actually this happens in English too. So what this means is that if you take too much time, you'll be late. So well, this is called conditional conjunction. And the point is that to is also understood as a marker for conditional. So to model these stages or transitions, I would like to use Dale's evolutionary game theory modeling to see how this change of language change happen. Right. So according to Dale's system, there are these the stages I just described has these transitions. So first, a recruitment stage where one morpheme is employed to disambiguate some confusing situation. And then categorization where each morpheme has each function, one-to-one. And then generalization, like the one that we just saw, like Tau is invading the function of EBA, so it started to get a conditional meaning. Okay. And well, according to Dale, she characterizes the grammaticalization path using privative contrast, privative features. So semantic grammaticalization path in the functional domain must be structurally underpinned by some privative contrast between a specific and the general meaning. So we consider two kinds of contexts. One is phenomenal context, where we talk about specific event tokens, like what's happening right now, right here, the specific events. And for like, is it snowing now in Hokkaido? So in my contrast, like I'm interested in causal and conditional. So causal meanings connects to specific events. So I will say the causal statement is a description of phenomenal context. The other one is the structural context, where we talk about general event types, like does it snow on Mars, right? Like the more general event, what the world is like in general. So in our case, the conditional statement it's a generalization about how the world is like. So it describes the rule of the world. So it's a structural. It describes structural context. And so signaling games with contextual factors. So in this model, context denotes a probability distribution over the state or meaning space. So we have two states or meanings. So here we have causal and conditional, the meanings that we want to convey. And two contexts, phenomenal context and structural context. So phenomenal context, we talk about specific events. Structural context, we talk about general rules of the world. So in phenomenal context, we are more likely to talk about causal things. We will communicate about causal statements. So that's why it got the higher probability. And we are less likely to talk about conditional statement because we are talking about specific things. In structural context, it's the opposite. So we are talking about general things. So we are less likely to talk about specific things, specific events, but it's more likely that we talk about general rules of the world. And we have two linguistic forms, node and EBA. Now, a speaker strategy is a function from the pair of contexts and meanings to the linguistic forms. So this is PCD, is partially context dependent strategy. And well, I guess I just showed this first. So this CD is context dependent strategy, where the speaker just use a single form every time. So in this context, the speaker is very lazy. Just speaker use eba all the time and let the hearer to guess from the context what the speaker meant. And the partially context dependent strategy is the speaker is now more attentive to context. So in phenomenal context, the speaker just use ever form as before, but in the structural context, the speaker thought, okay, we are in a structural context, but where we are more likely to talk about conditional statement. But what I want to say is a causal statement. So the hearer might misunderstand what I want to say. So I better hire a different morpheme so that we can disambiguate and avoid miscommunication. So in partially context dependent strategy, in the structural context, and the speaker wants to communicate causal meaning, in this case, the speaker employs node form. In explicit marking, so EM is explicit marking strategy, where just the speaker ignores the context, just match morpheme to the meaning. So node is causal, eba is conditional, node causal, eba conditional. In context dependence strategy prime, it's same as the context, the first line, but except that it's now all node instead of eba. A hero strategy is now the function from the pair of context and forms to the meaning. So how the hero interpret based on the context and the linguistic forms that the speaker uttered. So in the context dependent strategy, the hearer, the speaker just use the same form and don't care about the context. So the hearer has to be attentive to the context. And well, no matter what the speaker said, if we are in a phenomenal context, it's always causal. And if we in a structural context, it's always, always conditional. And a partially context dependent strategy, now again, well, both the hearer and speaker have to be attentive to the context. So in phenomenal context, it's again, whatever the speaker says, it should be causal. But now in the structural context, and then in the structural context, the speaker decided to use this node form. Okay, in this case, well, the speaker has been careful. So the speaker, what the speaker wants to communicate is the causal meaning. And the explicit marking is, it's just the one-to-one correspondence between node and so node map is cause, ignore the context, and node is causal, eba is conditional. In structural, so regardless of context, no matter what the context is, node is causal and eba is conditional. And unlike speaker strategy, we don't need this last line because it's exactly the same as the first line. Whatever the speaker said, it's always the hearer just look at the context, not the form. Also in this model, we need mutation. So the learning language is subject to mistakes. So offerings, the children might learn strategy B from strategy A. And in Dale, she has this discrete time version of the replicator mutator equation. And well, I don't have time to go through this in detail, but the strategy moves from J to I, and the newly acquired strategy, the probability or frequency of this strategy I after a time step, after one generation, is calculated based on this equation. And this QJI is the probability the strategy J mutates into strategy I, and this is like stipulated in the model. And then XJ is the original, the probability of the original strategy, and FJ is the average payoff strategy, original strategy, and then it's divided by 5, the average fitness of the population. Okay, so let's look at first recruitment transition. So from context-dependent strategy to partially context-dependent strategy. So linguistically, what's happening in this transition is the speaker decided to recruit some morpheme to disambiguate. So here, there's a new grammar being innovated. So this is how the DO stipulates the mutation probability. So this is the parent strategy, and these are offsprings, the children. So most of the time the children employ the same strategy, but some might move to partially context-dependent strategy in order to disambiguate some message. So here I have. Can you see my new? Are you seeing a different Adobe slide?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this part is the most exciting part of my talk. Okay. So here I animated. Okay. So we start out with this context dependent. So that's 1.0 probability. So almost everyone speaks with the context dependent strategy, and everything else is almost 0. But after some iterations, like about 20 something, this partially context dependent strategy wins. Okay, and then this. Yeah. All right, and then the next stage is categorization transition. So from partially context-dependent strategy to explicit marking strategy. Here, so now from here to here. Yeah, okay, and then, well, it's already here. So here we partially context-dependent wins, but then this explicit marking takes over at this point, like about 40 generations. All right. Okay. And then generalization transition from explicit marking strategy to context-dependent strategy. So that's this example, if you take too much time, you'll be late. So this got conditional. It emerged as a conjunction marker, but it got this conditional meaning. So according to Dale, this kind of generalization transition happens because, well, once the tool started to be used, then it got be frequently used. So the increase in the frequency of tool usage and the offspring input would cause an increase in the probability of mislearning. So there are a lot of tool around. The children hear a lot of toll, so they started to use for other cases. That is, there are more evidence for context-dependent strategy and less evidence for explicit marking strategy. And they will implement this idea by just manipulating this number here. So she directly manipulates from 0.03 to 0.04 and 0.05. And she argues that what's happening linguistically here is that learners are biased for the form-wise simple or context-reliant grammar. So in explicit marking strategy, we need two forms for each meanings. But for contextual dependent strategy, we only need one form, which is more, the system is simpler. Then, yeah, so this is the without manipulation. Then the explicit marking strategy just stays the winner. Well, this is not what we want. We want this purple line to come up. So with her mutation, extra mutation bonus, we get this. So at this point, the probability is manipulated to 0.4, and then around here, manipulated to 0.5. So we have this one as a winner. Yeah, so she manipulates this probability of the shifting from explicit marking to context-dependent strategy prime. And she motivates this move by saying that, well, we are biased for more form-wise simple grammar. We want fewer linguistic forms. But well, Yanovich said we don't need this direct manipulation, but we can just raise the cost parameter K in the expected payoffs. So from the same motivation, so in context-dependent and context-dependent prime, we only have one linguistic form, but partially context-dependent and explicit marking strategies, we need two linguistic forms, so it's more costly. And then we can penalize this system that have two forms in the expected payoff by changing the value of K. So, well, so here this in the speaker needs to deal with two forms, so it's more costly, so the payoff will be a bit lower. So in Dio's system, it's set to Dio's example is it's set to 0.01, but Yanovich said we can just change to 0.03 and we don't need to do this manipulation. Yeah, so here. Okay. Yeah, so here in the without manipulation, well, without changing this the value of K, we had this blue line, which is explicit marking was staying as the winner. But with this, just changing this the value of K, we can have this purple one to go up. Yeah, so it's just well, it's not exactly the same, but we get the same pattern. So with the left hand side is the one with the Deo's manipulation of mutation with the mutation bonus, the changing the value here and here. And we get this one as winner. And we don't need to do this manipulation of the probability, but just changing into 0.03, we can get the same result. All right, so let me conclude my talks. So I look at this Japanese V Eva and German Van construction. And I argued that the conventional semantic meaning of these constructions is a sequential conjunction, see updated phi and then updated psi. So causal meaning in early Middle Japanese and early New High German, it's obtained as an I implicature. Now there was conjunction biresing, and conditional meanings in present day Japanese and German are obtained by implicatures. I mean Q implicatures. So this is a pragmatic phenomena. So I look at two languages, so it's at least cross-linguistically attested, and it could be possibly universal. And a lot of remaining questions. In the beginning, I talked about ABA conditional, and I ignored in the latter half what happened to the ABA conditional. And also, as already said, there are a lot of other constructions that are conditional in Japanese, like taraba and naraba, which is also truncated as tara and nara, and tareba and nareba, tara nara and okay, yeah, I see. So tara and nara, well, one way to look at it is just to drop ba, but also some argue that it's as actually constructive form of tareba, which becomes taria, and this palatalization drop and then tara and nara. So there are a lot of phonologically interesting things going on here, and I don't have anything to say about this. And how do these other forms of conditionals interact with the diachronic development of Eva? I have to answer this. And also, what is this particle ba in Eva and Aba? So Fukuda said it's ambiguous between conjunction and conditional. It's also it's argued that it came from topic marker wa, which used to be pronounced as pa in Old Japanese. And then by sequential voicing, it became ba. So pa became, so is the model that we've seen, and the pa as topic marker, which became ba. And then Eba is also probably came from Eba. And there are a lot of languages that have the same morpheme that use topic and that mark topic and conditional. So that's very interesting. But well, I don't really have any story yet here. Okay, well, that's all what I have to say. So thank you very much for hearing.
Okay, thank you for a very nice talk. Let me get my participants up so I can see who's got a hand. So questions, please. Question. I have one. It looked to me like you started off with context-dependent usage and ended up with a context-dependent usage. The first one became partially context dependent, and then EM, whatever EM was, triggered by the introduction of a new form, right? A new
Uh,
form was very specific. It had only a narrower use out of a broader possibilities, but the cause, the no day as a cause, right?
right.
But in the end, that no day is still there as a cause. So would it by itself cause lead to a repetition of the same cycling, or at the end, do we end up with a steady state?
So yeah, so for Node and EBA, we don't see this the last part. I only talked about to and yeah. Well, I didn't write the chart like this, but it's you know right. So for Node and EBA, we are in this stage still. But in the future, we might start to use Node for conditional if this applies to Node and EBA contrast.
I see. I see. So it's not just the one thing, not just ABA that's changing, but Node comes in as a specific meaning, and in general, it changes over time as well. And so it's not going to itself be the trigger for a repeat of the a cycling of the same kind of a change. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Oh, yes, Jindy.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, so EBA was originally just a sequential conjunction, and then the conditional meaning developed later, and you said you proposed that it happened as implicature. And so in proposal 3, you wrote that, but could you explain this part again, more in more detail,
Right.
please?
Well, I think I was kind of vague, but EBA was still used in even in the older times. Well, according to so even in the old times, EBA you could use EBA for conditional. EBA had multiple meanings. The semantic meaning is the what I proposed, the phi update psi and then phi and then psi. But then if the context allows, it could be used for conditional as well. But later we have more specific morphemes for causal and conjunction. So only the conditional meanings survive. Like now it got the function that's specialized for conditional because other meanings are taken care by other morphemes. I don't know if I can really prove that that's what happened, but that's how I propose.
Okay, thank you.
And what's the mechanism, I'm sorry, by which the toll starts to increase its, I mean, it started off as a pure conjunction and it's now, you said, being used as a conditional. I'm wondering what it is that triggers that kind of a change? I mean, it's an observed change. I get that, but I'm just wondering how it is that that change is explained. That was a.
You mean
That kind of a toll right there, yeah. So
right? So it's well, according the they was originally is that they because people use toll a lot often, so some children mislearn that toll is should be used for conditional. I'm not I don't know if there's a well in case of more empirically toll is used what I read in the like traditional grammarian book, to is used like conditional or temporal because it's used as todojini at the same time as blah blah blah. So that's how it's being started to use as conditional or temporal. I mean, like temporal meaning like when.
So let me ask it in a slightly different way. Suppose that we started off with to just being conjunction. Would you ever expect it to change instead to causation and not conditional?
Causation.
I'm having a hard time,
Right.
but the explanation is that that gives you a prediction on how it would change, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah, I guess. Well, we can like even in this example, if you take too much time, you'll be late. Like taking too much time causes you to be late. So like we can get like I implicature even from this. And this. I'm not sure if both from this modeling you think if with the causal and conjunction so I was because it doesn't have this contrast. I think both causal and conjunction are more of phenomenal statements rather than structural statements. So I think we cannot use this we cannot use the same feature to model that shift if that happened.
Mhm, mhm.